Hey, looks like we are, looks like we are live. We're going to go ahead and get started. Hey, folks, Vice Mayor Rex Richardson here in the city of Long Beach. Welcome to CiviTalks LB, where we feature local leaders, local experts, engaged community members who's interested in our community through innovation, vision, and equity. We explore important issues occurring in Long Beach and around Southern California twice a month. And we are excited for the conversations we have today. Today's conversation, we have a number of experts with us. We're going to have a discussion on the future of transportation and infrastructure, the importance of building equity into these systems in order to boost our local economic recovery, but also to set the foundation for a cleaner, more sustainable, more thriving future. Before we jump in, I want to just give a couple updates. Things are. I'll start with the COVID-19 front. Case rate and positivity rates continue to decline. Those are great signs, and we feel really good about that. There was a recent update to the Stay for at Home order, allowing 25% capacity for indoor religious gatherings. That's a new development this week. So for those of you who need to get back to church, get back to church. We have a mobile vaccination clinic. It's been going well. This previous week we hosted one on the west side. It's very successful. Just yesterday we hosted a mobile vaccination clinic for the African American community at St. Mark's Church, where we vaccinated around 300 additional individuals. I think that was the number. Still a lot of work to do, but we're in the swing of things. Our vaccination process is rolling. Federal opportunities. Let's talk about that. I just wrote a letter with my hat as president of the Southern California region, advocating for $350 billion in state and in local funding, flexible local funding, as a part of President Biden's stimulus plan. And we're advocating for that because that's going to make a real difference for our communities. Last time with HEROES Act, cities under 400,000, under 500,000 were excluded from the first round. We're talking about flexible funding of cities of all sizes, because only one city in the whole SCAG region, City of LA, was eligible for CARES Act initially, and we had to fix that. So we're starting off advocating for all cities, so that's good. On the policy front, City Council meeting this week was pretty important. We had a discussion on our youth strategic plan, and we adopted that unanimously. We also stood up a program using federal sources and state sources, a $26 million tenant rental assistance program. And this rental assistance program will be the largest rental assistance program the city has ever done by far, with $26 million that we will administer here locally. That's a big deal. Big stuff on equity. Coming up soon at our February 16th meeting, there's a number of important council items. We'll be talking about a food security plan in the wake of the Kroger announcement of closing stores in Long Beach. We'll talk about a food security plan. We'll talk about violence prevention, ways to accelerate our violence prevention plan. We'll be talking about the creation of a youth fund to complement our youth strategic plan, leveraging Measure US and other things. So really important stuff coming up on the next city council meeting. And just some update. We talked about our economic recovery in December. Our region's doing an economic recovery plan. Long Beach is doing an economic recovery plan. We're out doing roundtables right now. We have about 20 of these roundtables scheduled. This will come back in front of our city council in March, and we'll do a CiviTalks when it comes back to just dive into what that looks like. And then tomorrow we're going to be announcing something really cool for our North Long Beach neighbors. It's called Thrive 90805, and it's looking at the social determinants of health in the 90805 area. So we're really excited. A lot of great announcements going to be over the next 90 days in the 90805 area. So those are some things to look out for. So we're going to go ahead and pivot to this conversation. First, let's go ahead and tee up. I'm going to open it up with some slides to set some context for us. But those of you who joined us on social media, if you look, there's going to be a link where you can join the chat and use some of the in-platform features. Like we have a question and answer section. We have a chat section where you can engage with our speakers live. And so I encourage you to come on into the platform and let's go ahead and get started. This conversation, we try to wrap up around 6:30 at the latest. Sometimes we go earlier, but 6:30 at the latest is when we wrap up. So let's go ahead and get started. So So as many of you know, I do, sir, I'm going to put on my hat as president of SCAG. This is our regional metropolitan planning organization, and that's responsible for transportation and housing and long-range planning for our region. And it's important for me to wear that hat today because we have some great leaders who focus on these regional issues around transportation and transportation equity. So I wanted to go ahead and start to set the tone and some context here. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so this talks a little bit about, what SCAG is, but in general, this talks a little bit about what SCAG is, but in general, here's the vision of SCAG. It's our regions metropolitan planning organization representing something like 191 cities, about half the state of California. And our mission here is to foster innovative regional solutions to address the issues plaguing our region. Let's go to the next slide. So this is a little bit of the scope. It's about half the state of California, and this is the 6 counties and 191 cities you can see here. And represented within this area is about 2/3 of the state's disadvantaged communities, and that's why equity is important to the conversation around transportation and housing and these other larger systems. But within, there's great economic power within this region. It's the 15th largest economy in the world with regional GDP of $1.2 trillion. It's pretty significant when you think about the Southern California region. So one major responsibility we have is our federal responsibility every 4 years to update our regional transportation plan, as well as our state's requirements on sustainability, which is called Sustainable Community Strategy. Together, it's a plan called Connect SoCal. The large plan represents about $638 billion with a B. Billion dollars. I like to say with a B. I get that from my chief of staff. $638 billion of infrastructure over the next 25 years. Why is it important? Well, like it says here, transportation is important to all of us. Transportation knows no boundaries. This sets the foundation for our whole entire economy. It helps facilitate competitiveness. Your economy, the size of your economy depends on how much you can export from your region to other regions. And all of that is connected to goods movement and our transportation network. So our economic blood is in our transportation system here in Southern California. Let's go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So within this plan, it's a lot of things that are important to all of us. Complete streets. Originally it was about, pavement, potholes and things like that. But complete street is about the experience and how you engage the street. The canopy, how safe it is to walk across the street. Complete streets is expanding now to, arrested mobility. Charles Brown has a book talking about arrested mobility, which is a street truly complete if you can't walk down it as a Black man? How do our policies interact with how we engage the public realm? And so some of these strategies are in our Connect SoCal plan, demand management system, curb management, which is really important given Uber and all of these other curb management strategies, our transit backbone. Obviously, goods movement's important. We're home to the Port of Long Beach, where 180,000 jobs in the region are directly connected to the success of the port. Key connectors are important. Smart cities and job centers, electrification, housing supportive infrastructure. All of these key elements are nested within that regional transportation plan. So just a few additional points. We talked about how 2/3 of the region, 2/3 of the state's disadvantaged communities are in our Southern California region. And so the plan speaks to how we address some of those inequities in the region. Here are three terms that folks will hear about as you think about the Connect SoCal plan. One is the environmental justice areas. So these are zones that we've identified that have higher concentrations of minorities, low-income households. So we identify those as environmental justice areas. SB 535, disadvantaged communities. That's another definition that's reflected here. That talks about cities, areas that are in top 25% of Columbine screen. A lot of Long Beach is reflected here. The district I represent in North Long Beach would be represented here. And then communities of concern. That's a broader definition that designates vulnerable areas within the plan. So all of these are sort of analyzed and called out within the Connect SoCal plan as we factor our planning and our transportation in the future. So, all right, so now we're going to jump right in. So we have 4 great speakers here. I'm going to take a moment, tell you a little about each of these speakers, and then we're going to jump into the conversation. So first, we have Senator Lena Gonzalez, who is 33rd District Senator representing Long Beach and the Gateway Cities region. She was elected in 2019, and she was also elected. She came from the Long Beach City Council, where she was elected in 2014. We were elected on the same day, and we served a long time together, and we're honored that she's here. But she has 1 million people she represents, and she recently was appointed as chair of the Senate Transportation Committee. And that's Senate Committee on Transportation. That's incredibly important, and we're honored to have her here. We also have Michele Martinez, a California Transportation Commissioner. I met Michele when she was a council member in Santa Ana, and she was a regional leader. At that time, she served as president of SCAG, the very role that I serve in today. In fact, I attribute her leadership and her encouragement to how I got more involved in SCAG. She intentionally reached out and pulled more leaders in, like myself and like Lena. And now she serves on the California Transportation Commission, and where she's considered a national leader on transportation and equity issues. She was president of NALEO, National Association of Latino Elected Officials, and she's a Long Beach resident. She lives right here in Long Beach. So we are proud to have my good friend Michele Martinez here. And we also have Demauris Terry. We're really excited to have Demauris as a part of this conversation. He's president of COMTO in Southern California. COMTO is the Council on Minority Transportation Officials and Conference of Minority Transportation Officials, Southern California chapter. He's also president and CEO of BA Inc., a civil engineering firm, and so he's both chairman of the board and executive vice president of BA Inc. And we're really excited to have him here. His firm is a minority-owned civil engineering firm and brings more than 20 years of business operations experience with a deep understanding of policies and requirements. He has strong leadership skills to catalyze and implement the company's strategic agenda, and we're really excited to have him as a part of this conversation. So let's take away the slide and let's jump right in. All right, so first I'm going to go to our Senator Gonzalez. And Senator, certainly welcome. We want to hear from you. This conversation on transportation equity is not a new conversation, but it's a lot of new faces and new leaders and key roles to really make a real difference in people's lives. And so I guess we'll start off. Tell us what are some of your priorities in your role, and if you could maybe speak to how equity ties into this entire conversation.
Definitely, and thank you so much, Vice Mayor, for this.
You know, I'm having some audio issues. You can't.
Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
Try it again. We cannot.
Let's try. All right, can you hear me okay?
Can you guys hear her, Michele? Demauris?
Okay, I'll try to.
Okay, all right. They're saying they can hear you, so good.
I can hear much better now.
Okay, great, perfect. I know I've been having some technical issues.
Just use your loud voice.
I know, I'm going to use my loudest voice I can. So thank you so much, Vice Mayor, and it's great to see you, Commissioner Martinez and Vice President Terry. It is great to be here in good graces with all of these experts. I myself don't consider myself an expert, but what I will say is I've been a representative of the area of Long Beach, now Southeast Los Angeles, and have represented the port for some time. And I'm a port senator, and I like saying that, but there's also some challenges that come with that. So the largest thing for me, as the Vice Mayor mentioned, is absolutely equity. I mean, the way I'm going to be chairing this Senate Transportation Committee is with that lens first, not just equity and how many bike lanes we have or funding. It's social, racial, economic, and environmental justice equity is what I am going to be looking at in this new position. I'm the first Latina that will be serving in this role. I am the first woman to serve in this role in the last 20 years. The last person was also from Long Beach, Betty Carnett, Senator Carnett. And so I think it's really important that my community sees someone that looks like me, but will also advocate for them, for the communities of color that desperately need good air quality, and ensuring that we're doing everything we can on the transportation front to get to our goals, but in a way that includes them first. So my very first the issue that we will be dealing with generally is air quality and reducing GHG emissions, diesel particulate matter, especially as we have the Port of Long Beach and we have a multitude of trucks going up and down the 710 corridor from the port all the way through South LA, where I represent. We have to create investments in clean technology around our ports. Heavy-duty vehicles need to be a part of that conversation. We have to assess alternative fuels like hydrogen fuel cell, and also get to a point where we do look at electrification, but at some point we have to be able to assess, the innovation sometimes doesn't match up with the goals. So we need to be able to assess and have a portfolio of all those things. And of course, invest in our freight corridors. And in fact, I have a bill called the Clean Freight Corridor Bill that will look and kind of plan ahead for these 2035 goals. As many of you know, Governor Newsom put forward a 2035 goal for clean vehicles, zero emission vehicles, light duty, and then 2045 heavy duty. And we want to be able to plan ahead. 2035 is around the corner, and we have to be able to plan ahead to ensure that we have not only the vehicle infrastructure or the vehicles that are zero emission and that we invest in that technology, but also the infrastructure on the roads, charging infrastructure, and also include our communities. In addition to that, we talk a lot about light duty vehicles being zero emission, but a lot of folks don't feel, in my community at least, that it's attainable. In low-income communities of color, they don't feel that zero-emission vehicles speak to them. The marketing doesn't speak to them. It's not language accessible. And the rebate programs don't speak to them. I think the last data set from the Air Resources Board on low-income community rebates was from 2015. So we need to update the data, and we absolutely need to do more work to ensure that our low-income community members have opportunities, like infrastructure at apartment buildings and multi-dwelling units as well. And then lastly, because I know there's a lot of more knowledge that we need to hear from my colleagues here, but public transit is so very important now. We know that ridership has gone down significantly, upwards of 60%. Paratransit, so people with disabilities, has gone down 80%, and so we need to get that ridership back, because that means our economy gets back. But most importantly, we support our essential workforce that rely, especially here in Los Angeles, relies so heavily on public transportation. And so I'll be digging into those issues and ensuring that public transportation is still safe and reliable, and that we can continue working with the federal government to provide additional relief. They're going to be providing relief to many of our transit agencies through 2022, and we want to make sure that happens and hopefully get to a point where we have fareless options in some cases for many of our low-income essential workers. And I think that's really, really important. So with that, all to say that this is, again, within the lens of equity. It's within the lens of ensuring that people are heard and included. And when we're making policies in Sacramento, that it really takes into consideration our communities that have been suffering the most from bad air quality, high asthma rates, cancer rates, and really not being included in the workforce as well. And so I just want to thank you, Vice Mayor, again for giving me the opportunity, and I'm excited to hear more from everyone.
Thanks, Senator. I think the things that you said a lot of great things. Those are all great areas to focus on. Two things that stood out were your Clean Freight Corridor bill. I think it's going to make a big difference in the 710 communities. So thanks for picking that up, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And I also appreciate that you brought up ridership decline in public transit. A lot of folks thought that given the pandemic and more folks staying at home, that we'd see traffic diminish. And we saw it for a short period of time. But because public transit ridership was down with concerns of COVID-19, plus ride sharing, you're not carpooling anymore because of COVID-19, we actually have the same amount of vehicles on the road today. And so that certainly complicates conversation about getting to cleaner air given that we have these dynamics with how we move around. So certainly, thank you. Next, I want to bring Michele into the conversation. Michele, you know, you're someone that I've known and I've worked with, and I've certainly learned from in years to come. And you're now not president, excuse me. You're now in the California Transportation Commission, where you serve with. And Lena, you have a seat there too now as a Senate Transportation. You don't get on the Transportation Commission? Okay. Well, I wanted to go to you, Michele. Like from your standpoint, give me your perspectives. What are the issues of today? And I see that there are just more folks that look like you and me in the discussion. And what are we doing together to help and really advance the conversation on equity? You're muted, Michele.
Oh, thank you. Let me start off by thanking you, Vice Mayor Richardson, for inviting me to be a part of this conversation and space, and to be a part of this with Senator González and Mr. Demauris, I think is his name, who I got to meet today. I'm really excited that you're bringing voices and power from the margins of this center stage. At the end of the day, you know, I don't consider myself an expert as well as Senator González mentioned. I'm more of a learner, and now being on the California Transportation Commission, that's exactly what I'm doing. I do come from local government. I came as a former president of SCAG, so I bring a different lens. But more importantly, what I think is important that we are seeing more people of color part of these commissions, because for a very long time we weren't at the table. We were on the menu, and I think for decades, because we were on the menu, we saw the social injustice, the racism, the segregation. And you can see that with our roads. But before I chime more in about equity and about the California Transportation Commission, I would be remiss if I didn't thank our great leader, who's the chair of the California Transportation Commission, Hillary Norton, and my fellow commissioners, in particular, Joe Liu, who represents the LA region, but is a huge advocate as it pertains to climate change and environmental justice, and really held not only our commission, but our staff as it pertains to our equity statement. And so I was really excited when I joined that commission that we had some great commissioners, and the governor is making changes to the commission. And so I'm excited to now be a part of this commission and to learn and to be a voice for those who have not been represented. And so, when for us to move forward, we need to look backwards and we need to look at our history. And I think the California Transportation Commission, Caltrans, CalStat, I think the state is moving in a direction where we're looking at our history and knowing that there were wrongs that were done, in particular communities of color, Black communities, and the Latino community, where you have massive highway expansion, and you didn't have voices that were able to articulate that this wasn't going to be beneficial from a public health perspective, from a built environment perspective. And as you know, I'm really big on land use and zoning, and it's all interconnected. And so we cannot look at transportation infrastructure or investments in a siloed approach. And I think for a very long time, because of the way our federal dollars came down, and you saw that for many decades in California, what we were doing to communities of color, and thinking that the infrastructure investments that we were making were positive, that they were going to bring economic development. And instead, it did the opposite. If you look, and you talked about the 710 corridor, if you look at that area and what has happened in regards to public health, and you put that lens on the amount of people that have asthma, our young kids, our families, it angers me. But I'm excited today that we are actually having these conversations. And when I talk about equity, I want to be very clear, because we use those words a lot, and they just can't be words. They just can't be statements. For me, equity means access to active transportation opportunities, access to ensuring that when you're walking or you're biking, or even if you're taking shared mobility or transit, that you have the opportunity to do so. And certain communities, we don't have that option. And so I think we need to ensure that when we have organizations, and I know SCAG with your leadership pushed a racial equity statement. And again, I always say that let us not confuse activity for achievement. And let me repeat that again. Sometimes with policymakers and government, we tend to say a lot and put a lot of plans out there, but doesn't mean that we're going to achieve what we put on paper or the statements that we've said. And so I think it's imperative that the public, that the community who truly is empowered, that they're engaged, because there's a big difference between representation and participation. And so I think as we move forward and we have this discussion about equity, I think community engagement and outreach has to be at the forefront. It can't be on the back end. A lot of times when we set these plans and guidelines, we tend to take, we go out there into the community. I look at it from an analogy, from a food analogy. We just don't want to be at the table. We actually want to pick the ingredients. But the ingredients sometimes in transportation is kind of shoved down, and here are the guidelines. And what do you think at the 11th hour? And so I think we need to retool how we look at community engagement today and ensure that we have true participation. And I want to be very clear with the next statement that I'm going to make is that for the first time, I've seen Caltrans, CalStat, the California Transportation Commission, and other agencies finally coming together and wanting to work to improve the lives of Californians, not just through transportation and housing. You look at the governor's executive orders as it pertains to climate change and electrification, our state legislators that are moving to connect the dots. But we have to take a hyper-local approach. We know that none of this can get done without us at the local level. So land use and zoning have played a pivotal role in the disparities that we not just faced 20 years ago, but what we're facing today. When we look at practitioners, elected officials, we have to realize at the local level, the only way that we're going to make change is by listening to our community and ensuring that we hold our elected officials accountable and making sure that the investments that we're making in transportation are tied to not just, and I don't mean to be rude here, just tied to jobs, tied to the economy. It has to be tied to our community, to housing, to education, to public health. And so I think it's important that as we have these conversations, that we understand that we can't focus on parts of a system, that we have to focus on the whole. And I think we haven't done a really good job at the local level. And so, yes, transportation investments matter, but those transportation investments and monies, when they come to the local level, we need to make sure that there's connections, that we just don't take money for money's sake because we want to expand a road, but we want to make sure that there's connections to all forms of mobility, but more importantly, that we respect those folks at the hyper-local level, which is our neighbors in our neighborhoods and in our cities. And we tend to do that at the back end. And so, I'll cut it short here. I know I said a lot, but I really want to take a hyper-local approach in my role as a transportation commissioner. And definitely, we tend to shy away sometimes from the important issue of land use because it's a local, home rule perspective that's at the state level, that we have no authority over land use or zoning, that it's the locals, but we're all interconnected, interrelated, and we need to ensure that we work hand in hand to ensure that those monies are being used effective and efficiently, but creating an environment that is healthy for all in California.
Thank you so much. Powerful comments, Michele. I remember why you were so inspiring when you were SCAG president, and we were all paying attention to your leadership. I think what was a few things stood out that you said. I think in general, it's great to see the way, in your role as California Transportation Commissioner, the ways in which around the relationship between transit agencies and communities, how thinking is evolving around, the thinking around movement of goods or moving of people. And I think it's going to accelerate. Something you said about planning, and I'm a big plan. I love to plan the future of North Long Beach. We're going to plan the economy. We're going to plan. And for me, it's because in local government, you have term limits, you have political dynamics change every 2 years, given how elections play out. And if you get a plan down and you get community embraced around the plan, that takes a vision and carries it out a little bit longer. It makes it a little more ironclad from the politics and the shifting of the winds. And so, I'm a proponent of plans, but I believe you plan your work, but then you work the plan. You have to have the funding to implement it. If it's centered on community, then community members would be the ones to hold the next council person accountable or the next commissioner accountable. So I'm a big fan of planning, but I'm mostly a fan of policy. I think program is good, but policy is progress. Policy, I talk about like this concept of inequity. If you see patterns of disparity, I say this all the time, you see patterns of disparity that perpetuate for generations, your neighborhood has been the same way for generations, let's stop saying the system is broken. The system is doing exactly what it's designed to do, except you didn't write that system. Someone who didn't look like you or live in your neighborhood didn't write that system, didn't create that system or that policy. And the answer is systems change. The answer is put an alternative system together that's more superior. It helps you thrive, and people don't see it as aren't as invested in the older system because it's in a superior, right? So I'm a big fan of policy. I believe policy is progress. So thank you so much for lifting that up. Now we're going to go to Demauris, and Demauris, we're excited to have you, Mr. Terry, and I'll tell you, as president of ComTo, you're in a unique position. You're a leader and actually advocating to policymakers about diversity within employment, inclusion, contracting, which is incredibly important. It's difficult to make sure you have the base of businesses to be able to compete for contracts, and that your contracts aren't designed in a way that creates barriers for people to actually win economically in our economy. And public investment is Americana. It goes, you're talking New Deal stuff. Well, the New Deal's design, America's demographic is very different. Today, we have to think about a set of policies to make sure that when you set these things, it actually benefits our local economy. So I'm really interested in what is the scope of the economic impact of transportation? How can that help elevate disadvantaged communities? And what can we do? What should government leaders do to make sure that, contractors reflect the community? What are the things that we could do? So let's start there.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Rex Richardson, for inviting me to participate in this distinguished panel. I want to thank you, Michele and Lena, for allowing me to share this space with you. And before we dive right into it, I want to say SCAG and ComTo go hand in hand. We both have a mission to ensure that there are opportunities and participation within transportation, especially within minority individuals, businesses, communities. And we do this through advocacy, through training, through education, professional development. Equity from my end it's all about the education and access that we provide. If we don't provide the education and access and the resources for our generations to come, then it all just falls by the wayside. We're doing this for centuries now. We're at a point where, and I'm veering off. I'm going to come back. We're at a point where we've seen a lot over the past couple of years, and this past year, and we can't let that go to waste. The ball is rolling. We got to pick it up. We got to get in the game. We have to, speaking towards policy, we have to ensure that these policies are set in place that they allow a successful process so that we can provide resources and tools to our neighborhoods, to our communities, to our schools and facilities. Right now, a lot of policies in play for small companies like myself has been helpful. But a lot of times, like you said, the contractors, they still use that to their benefit. It's hard to get in the door and remain in the door. They create excuses built around some of these policies. And for that, we have to come back to, you and Lena, and Michele, and hold these, not so much the agencies, but hold these contractors that we're providing all these billions of dollars to perform in these minority neighborhoods. We got to hold them to the fire. We got to make sure that they're giving back to our communities that they're building through, make sure that they're hiring local brown, Black individuals, making sure that they're going into our schools, educating, training, letting our kids be exposed to not only just the sweat equity part of building on the construction side, but the back office part of it. There's a lot more that goes into it. And if we don't stand up and force them to do that, then who will? So again, education is the key for me when it comes to equity and providing those resources so that we can go back and push our minority communities a lot further.
Certainly, thank you for that perspective. I think you're hands-on. I mean, you work within that space, and you know what those barriers are. And the more that we can include voices of people who are direct conduits providing jobs, the job creators into the conversation, the better. I think we're in a unique time, I would say, in that you have a new presidential administration, a new Congress, a new Senate, who are interested in some degree, but also making major commitments to infrastructure. And, given that we're likely going to be in a very heavy discussion on infrastructure at the federal level, I'm interested from all three of your perspectives. I'm interested in what you're hoping to see in the federal transportation plan, how we can advance your strategies, Senator Gonzalez, around transportation in our region. Michele, some of you are on a board that deploys programs across the state around transportation. What are you hoping for in this package? And Demauris, it would be a shame if this big transportation package comes out and it doesn't lift up communities in need, and it doesn't create opportunities for equity and advancement, economic inclusion. And so, to the three of you, and jump in any order, in your unique perspectives, what are you hoping for? So the first question, what are you hoping for in this new transportation package? And I'm going to carry this message to Congressman Lowenthal in my next CiviTalks. But also, what can we do as the Long Beach community, as people invested in civics? What should we be doing to help support the things that you think need to be in that infrastructure plan? All right, who wants to go first?
Yeah, well, from my perspective, I think a bigger, and don't shoot me when I say this, but a bigger piece of the pie. Locally we do a 27% and sometimes 33% minority participation across the board. But that number that you threw out in the beginning of our conversation was a big number. 650 billion with a B, as you stated. Now, if you look at 27% of 650 billion, is that really doing the job that it needs to do to provide the resources and the money and the profits that we can build upon in our communities? And let me back up, because when it comes to contracting alone, my company dabbled in general engineering construction at one point in time, and we dumped it about 2 years ago and started focusing on what we started was civil design. The reason why is because we couldn't keep up. So we jumped into civil design construction because we kept hearing what everyone else in our industry is hearing. There's not enough people. We don't have enough help. This number is too large. This 27% that I got to split is too big, and I can't find qualified minority firms. Well, I know several qualified minority firms that can not only produce but exceed the expectation of the contractor. But many times the hurdle doesn't stop with just bringing minorities in the door. We got to look at the policy from what's keeping us from exceeding or excelling once we get through the door.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the things of, bonding. It's hard enough to go out here and try to maintain a staff
Absolutely.
of contractors. And there's another thing to start paying for that insurance, paying for that bonding. You can't pay for the bonding. There's too much. And we also need to look at how we focus on the turnaround of payment. My company's been fortunate enough we can sustain the 60, 90-day policies that firms turn around and pay. But a lot of these firms have closed their doors, just basically walked away from $1 million projects because they can't fund the entire project. And when you're floating, a heavy payroll plus materials plus your back office for 90 to 120 days, it's unsustainable. So it's
Right.
one thing to put in play the 27, 33% minority participation, but if we're not looking at the system and the process as a whole and doing something about it from a policy level, then we're never going to have the qualified, minority firms participating on these projects.
Right. So and we'll move on in a moment, but I want to tease that out. Being in city council, since 2014, and I spent 4 years as the chief of staff before that. I always hear you always hear the contractors or the pastors. They'll say, "Hey, I see construction. I don't see anybody who looks like me on the construction." Yeah. And then when we do these bidding conferences, when a RFP is coming up, we'll get all the potential bidders together and do a conference. You'll notice that even the people at the conference don't reflect the demographics of the community, and sometimes we'll see that the insurance and bonding requirements are high, and some of the standards a lot of smaller companies can't compete. Or you'll see a big guy who's owned the contract for a long time. No one can compete with them, and it makes it difficult for them to get in. And LA County is doing a lot of work around contracting. They set a goal of 25% of their contracts going to social enterprises and minority businesses and things like that. In Long Beach, we've called it out. We did everyone in and called it out and said we need to focus on procurement. There's always an excuse. There's not enough money to do it. And I believe it would be a shame if we were to get through this next round of massive major stimulus and building our city, if we don't have a good, solid procurement process on the books. And what's interesting is, when we talk about what needs to happen and how we recover economically, a lot of folks, I hear a lot of conversation about if those people just had enough training, then they'll be fine. Or if they had enough resources, they'll be fine. And I think that shifting the blame on the individual, where we got to be thinking about what's wrong with the system and how the system is failing these individuals. We need to retool now. We need to be retooling our procurement processes now, because even if stimulus comes in the next few months on infrastructure, it's going to be played out. It's going to play out for years. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the Obama stimulus, played out for years. So we have time, we have runway to really get that together. So I really, what you said really truly resonates with me. So Lena, Michele, what do you guys think about this conference? What are you looking for in the upcoming infrastructure bill?
Vice Mayor Richardson, thank you. That's a great question. Look, the California Transportation Commission just gave, just recommended some dollars for active transportation. We all know that here in California, it's been a new phenomenon. And I do see Pam O'Connor, who's a former council member from Santa Monica and former SCAG president, who really mentored me and advocated, for me to, move with the bully pulpit towards active transportation and the Go Human campaign. We're seeing communities, and I want to say Long Beach has led the way for a long time as it pertains to active transportation. You guys have been a great leader, but the amount of communities today that are applying for that funding, we just don't have enough. If you look at our SB2 funds, it doesn't allow for a lot of those specific monies to go to active transportation. So the amount of people, cities that are applying and agencies is not enough for the amount of money that we have. And so we have to push the federal government to help to assist us. But I will say too, that we have to build differently and we have to build better. And that doesn't mean continuing to expand our highway systems. That means that we need to build better connections within our communities. I think we've, thinking that we can add an additional road in one of in one of our communities, or expand our capacity in our arterials or our freeway systems, we're mistaken. We've been doing this for a very long time, and we still have tremendous amount of congestion. That is not the answer. We have to do things differently, and I'm not shy to say we got to stop building new and fix what we currently have, and move towards building better connections in our local communities. And again, taking that hyper local approach. It's time. I'm ecstatic that Mayor Pete is now at the helm as a secretary there, and I believe he is going to take a hyper local approach. And so I'm excited about that.
I'll tell you, having a mayor serve as transportation chair, that's going to open up the playbook a little bit as Secretary of Transportation. So I'm looking forward to his perspective. A lot of times in local government, and you mentioned earlier, land use is where our power really exists, right? We can say where a warehouse can go and where a gas station can go, but the impacts of what that warehouse attracts or what that fuel station attracts, we're very limited. Sure, you can do transportation corridors and truck corridors and those things, but for the most part, those are regulated by other agencies, more specifically CARB,
Right.
Things like that. And so it's good when you have a person in local governmental transportation that knows, like, some city council members pissed off somewhere and doesn't have an answer to the question about what I'm about to build in their community, right? So having local elected officials serving these other roles, it brings a different awareness. So thank you for lifting that up. Lena, I saw you unmuted. You want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, definitely. This is great conversation. I would say I am also excited that Secretary Buttigieg is now our transportation voice at the federal level. It's a whole new day with a brand new administration who has put forward equity and people of color first, which I think is just a new day for all of us, especially in our roles as commissioner and as senator and as president in the private sector, pushing these agendas. So I'm really thrilled about that, first and foremost. What my wish list for the federal government, of course, is because we have this governor's executive order that we all believe in. The Port of Long Beach put forward the 2035 goals even before the state enacted it. And my deep goal is to ensure that we make the port communities an example for the rest of the state. Again, going back to the heavy duty vehicles, and I'm hearing that it could cost upwards of $6 billion. We don't have that money in our coffers, unfortunately, in the state of California. So to be able to ask the federal government specifically on clean freight corridors, the infrastructure, and pushing that equity for low-income communities, for light-duty vehicles is going to be key. I would also say on the transit side as well, going back to that, knowing that so many rely on transit and public transportation, we know that transit currently is losing about $2 billion a year. That's significant. And even though they're just now getting federal money to last them through 2022, in most cases, that's just covering operating expenses. That's not looking ahead at the electrification that needs to be done, that many of them want to do. They don't even want to look at alternative fuels. They want to flip the switch and go from diesel to electrification right away, which only helps our communities, especially our communities of color. The last thing, I think, to President Terry's discussion about a diverse supply chain, I really wish in the state of California we would have passed Prop 16, because then we would have had an opportunity to say yes to government contracts that are diverse. So because we know that there's a bottleneck. not at the local level, but also at the state level, where we're doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, which is not helpful for our communities. And we need to do more, and we need to bump that up at the federal level. So I think all in all, to wrap that up in a nice bow, is to say that we need, we're pushing these equity measures locally and statewide, but we need to really ask the federal government. We haven't seen that in 4+ years, right? Equity and racial justice, economic and environmental justice. So asking them to start inputting, maybe even requiring transit communities or transit agencies, to include racial equity statements in everything that they do. I actually saw one yesterday from a transit agency, and I was very, very surprised, but I was very glad to see that they are looking at things differently, because we've had this time over this year to deal with the hardest challenges, but also become really creative in the way we're going to kind of recover when we get back. But we were going to need the federal government to step in with us, not just on the funding level, but really on the equity side, to be very explicit about their intention.
Thanks, Senator. Good points. I think every time I see those equity statements, I get excited too. I remember a time when there was a debate. I remember having a debate with colleagues about whether you support equity or equality, and it was the wrong conversation. It's not an if or and. We support both. Equity is about need and access and getting a seat at the table. It's changing the system so everyone can fully participate and thrive. Equality, that's important too, equal rights and those things, but it's applied to a very different set of conversations. And so when they include the equity statements in local policy or state agencies or regional agencies, what it says is we're openly acknowledging that there's an impact on policy, and we want to make sure that that impact is equitable and doesn't exacerbate certain situations. So it's important. No one bucks an eye when we talk about a fiscal impact statement, or when we talk about, an environmental impact, right? We didn't talk about equity impact statements. So I think that's good. You also brought up Prop 16. It's a great shame that didn't pass. That just creates a direct pathway to, address the very things that we have challenges addressing in local governments, which is how do we make sure that our investments, our procurement actually benefits our local communities? How do we make sure the policies that we shape don't have disproportionate impacts? And it'd be great with Prop 16, you could just specifically call it out and say, we don't want this to impact this group, or we want to make sure that this group is included because the system historically excludes them. But we don't have that, and we have more work to do to get there. I want to answer the question that I asked you all about what I want to see, what we want to see out of the bill. Is that okay? Can I jump in a little bit? I think I would really like to see a clean, green infrastructure package in and around our port communities. That's what I'd love to see. There's a big discussion on zero emission and near zero emission. I get it. There's 8,000 trucks within the port that have to turn over in the next few years to become cleaner. Do I go buy this truck where the technology, the zero emission electric technology, the infrastructure may not be in place, or the truck may not be commercially available today? Do I get a near zero emission vehicle? But if I do, am I going to miss out on all the incentives? Am I going to be penalized for buying this, which certainly cleans the air, but it's not zero, it's near zero? We can help balance that conversation out by investing in clean it, asking the federal government to come into our areas, invest in fueling infrastructure, invest in electrification, and come up with a plan to make a massive investment right here in this area. And then we go and tie it to our Long Beach City College and our Southwest and our Compton colleges, and we make sure that we're building a workforce that knows and understands green infrastructure. I would love for this package to really help Southern California and help our port communities make a major leap as a national leader on green infrastructure. I'd love to see that, and that will make it a lot easier for agencies like AQMD and CARB to simply continue to push the best technologies because the infrastructure is in place. And so that's something I would love to see, a major effort. I've actually asked staff to put together a proposal and to bring it to both ports and AQMD to advocate for this in the next package. So we'll see where that goes. So we're going to pivot now. Thank you all. And it's 5:56, and we're going to jump in some Q&A. I see a lot of conversation in the event chat, but I'm going to go down to Q&A, and I'm going to advise people. I see there's people here in the platform. If you have a question, place in the Q&A section, and I'm going to prioritize those to ask the group. And to the group, this is a fireside chat style. You don't have to get everything right here. I think what people love most is just having access and being able to see us have these conversations and understand that policymakers, we do give a critical evaluation to the things that we do, and there's ways to contribute to that conversation. So I want to start. I see Suzanne Cook asked the question, said, as a lifelong public transit user, and thank you for being a lifelong public transit user, the connections, the routes, the timetables, they don't line up. The further you need to travel, the more connections you need to make. They all cost money. Most importantly, the cost time to the rider. How will you address this for public transit riders? And I'm going to go to Michele, because Michele, you uniquely, you have been a council member, a SCAG president, but now you develop programs to address this very issue on the Transportation Commission. So how could you speak to that? The rider experience, going from one place to the next, it's a lot of improvement could happen. So what are your thoughts? What can we tell Ms. Cook?
Well, I want to start off with the statement from my good friend Chuck Marone from Strongtown, who I'm a big supporter and believer in. He says our transportation systems are focused on maximizing the amount you can travel, not minimizing the amount you have to travel, right? And that's a really key statement. And again, we're not there yet. There's progress. There's conversations being had. We're aligning our systems, but we have a long way to go when we start to understand that everything is interconnected. But we also have to go to the user. Again, I respect practitioners in this field, but they're an expert in the technical aspect, but they're not the person that is actually writing the bus system or the rail system 100% of the time. And there's some that do take that, but we need to understand the experience. And again, going back to that hyper local, is hearing from these folks, how can we maximize the opportunities to coordinate with one another? One thing that I realize about government, and this is no fault of our community, is that we're very siloed. So if it's up to the transportation authority, whether it's in Los Angeles, what's Metro, or Orange County, OCTA, well, that's their problem. Well, it's not just their problem. It's all our problem. But again, I'm going back to this community focus, to the participation, and ensuring that the only way we're going to make progress, you can continue to give dollars and continue to make changes to our programs and our guidelines, but if we're not getting direct input from the users, we are not going to move the needle forward. So she certainly is right. I think we need more coordination. We need better connections. And we haven't had that. I thought we figured that we can use shared mobility like the Ubers and the Lyfts and micro mobility, which I'm a big supporter of the birds and all that to get us from first to last mile. But we're still far from meeting the needs of the users. And I think we got to go back to that basic conversation. And again, having them at the table and not at the menu.
That's a great answer, and it all goes back to people-centered design of our system, going back to the people. So thank you for lifting that up. I'm going to go to Lena with the next one, Senator Gonzalez, rather. Okay, so Dale Lauterbach is a neighbor of mine. He lives in my neighborhood, and he's here watching. He says, Rex, I'm a big proponent of EVTOL as the future of local and regional air transportation. EVTOL, that's electrical vertical takeoff and landing. So drones, helicopters, those things that can take off vertically and get somewhere, it's clean. And he says, I would love to get a vertiport located in District 9 as the first location here in Southern California. And for the sake of this conversation, we'll say in the Long Beach area, right? We'll say that, right? In the Long Beach area, let's get a vertiport. as the first location in Southern California in the 33rd Senate District, right? Ideally, running up to the 2024 Olympics. And thank you, Dale. And I'm going to go to the center for this. I've seen these images of the future concepts, future technologies. People are getting in a one-man helicopter and going straight to a heliport, on top of, the U.S. Bank building downtown L.A. or whatever, and getting out and going to your meeting. What are your thoughts on future emerging technology? How can we do that to bring exciting new opportunities to our communities, particularly communities, disadvantaged communities?
I love that. I hope you can hear me okay, and I'm going to speak louder because I know a few people couldn't hear me before. But I love that question because with transportation, what I'm finding is that there are so many evolving technologies. Just today, meeting with one that was Vera Mobility, just talking about speed safety cameras. You've got, this new technology, as Dale mentioned. So there's a lot of different evolving technologies. But again, what I would say is to go back to what we talked about in terms of equity is that we have to ensure that these technologies, how are they impacting our communities at the end of the day? And that's a good point. How are they investing back in District 9, North Long Beach, District 33, in the state of California to be able to really add to the transportation conversation? But what they ultimately do is they provide us really good data. And I think that's what's most important. Even if it's in concept, I think there are some places that are being a little bit more forward-thinking in technology. Like, for instance, there's a DMV kiosk happening in Montana that California hasn't signed on to yet because we've got a lot of privacy issues and privacy controls in our policy work. Not to say that we can't get these things done, but I just see that there's so much work being done in the transportation field that we can absolutely ensure that is equitable, but also invest back in our community. What I also say, another point to Dale's, in addition to this technology, I just heard today that the U.S. Department of Transportation's their only R&D facility is in the Midwest. And so I'm thinking, we are the hub in California of innovation. We are the 8th, 5th, 7th, 6th, I don't know what. We're always changing, largest economy. We can absolutely have another R&D facility here in the Department of Transportation in the federal level. That's another ask that we can make, right, to ensure that these technologies, if they go from concept to actual implementation, that they're really doing good work in the clean, green transportation space. So I look forward to seeing all of those efforts and, just really being a part of, the future of transportation, the future of tech. But again, ensuring that it impacts our communities equitably and fairly.
All right, I knew you were the right person for that question. A lot of folks don't know, before Lena was in the Senate, she worked at Microsoft. She's big on technology and advancement in the future and all those things. I want to go to another question. And this one, and I'm going to come to you, Demauris, on this one. So it says, what's everyone's position on P3s, public-private partnerships, to support moving transportation? Now, I want to go to you, Demauris, as the person here really sort of representing the private sector. How can P3s help advance our transportation issues, and what do we stand to gain by looking at P3s? And I'll add some stuff to this afterward. Go for it.
All right. I think P3s are great. I think it's a great opportunity for to not only push out projects a little bit faster and also hold the P3 or the owner of it to the life cycle, the maintenance of it. I think a lot of our bridges and roadways would be slightly improved or upheld. But more importantly, I think P3s allow, from a government level, will allow government funds to be redirected. When you bring in a private entity to invest and make sure those projects go forward and fund those projects, then we now can kind of take some of that funding and put it back into our communities and our issues that impact our economy. Homelessness, poverty, things of that nature. So I think going, more P3s, in my opinion, is a great route to go. And looks like Shanae asked that question. she's a great friend and an advocate of Compto. So, and she does a lot of work with Metro, and so I'm pretty sure she's advocating for P3s as well.
Right, right. Thanks for. I should have shouted out Shanae Rourke. We were in a meeting just today. So Shanae's a good advocate for inclusion and diversity, and she's
She is.
yeah, a tremendous advocate. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Michele, you wanted
Yeah.
to touch on this?
Very quickly, Vice Mayor Richardson, what I don't call them P3s, I call them P4s, people public private partnerships, because ultimately one of these public works or infrastructure projects can get approved. They typically get derailed because we don't do a good community engagement and outreach process, because we don't put the people first. So if we don't want, a lot of times our projects are getting derailed, and folks like Demauris in the private sector that are trying to streamline and move things forward, they end up getting stuck, because at the end of the day, who has to approve those projects, right? We can't get them done without the people. So remember, it's a P4, not a P3.
That's a good point.
Never fails. Michele has always had the zingers. I want to credit you for it, but the P4s. Here's what I was saying. We learn in economics there's no such thing as free lunch, right? You're going to pay one way or the other. You're going to pay. Either you're going to pay in how you neglect your system, or you're going to pay through taxes, or you're going to pay in one way or the other. Like, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And the P3, I think it really just comes down to local preference. There's a social cost in some communities that are too high. Privatizing the 110 express lane and making sure that you put the fast track, equity issues associated with that. But then you go to Orange County, and Orange County is a big proponent of toll roads, and their freeways are less congested, and which leads to better air quality. But they have a lot of private toll roads. I was able to go and explore, do a study on what's it called, the VMT, vehicle miles traveled, and how those programs work in New Zealand, in Australia. I was able to go and see them, and it works for them. The VMT, these programs work for them, and this is when a vehicle miles traveled is, hey, instead of like paying at the pump for roads, you pay by how much you drive. Obviously, the angels are in the details on how it will work. People that say have a longer commute would say, hey, that's not fair to me. But it just depends on what works for your community. So I think P3s are valid, P4s are a valid tool, but you just have to make sure that it aligns with the social costs of the communities that you represent. Again, I've seen it happen. I've seen it work overseas. I've studied it. I've seen the pilots, Northern California and I think Seattle, and other areas. And the public-private partnerships, they're something that we have to deal with and something we have to think about if we're going to, make sure that we continue to expand our network. But again, like Michele said, it just is rooted in people. So we're at 6:10. I see a few more questions. Some of these I'll jump in and take myself. We'll call this a lightning round to close it up. I know that all of you have family requirements and other things, and I want to be respectful of that. My wife is defending her dissertation tomorrow, and so I got to get home and get these kids so they can prep, so she can prep tonight. But I want to get to some of these questions. We'll do a little lightning round. If it's something I can answer, I'll just answer it. So we did Dale's question, we did Suzanne's question, we handled Shanae's question. I see John Kendrick. Let's see this. Let's see, where are we? Did I lose it? Okay, here it is. There's a lot of talk about low ridership, but nothing's been done about the litter at the bus stops. Bus lines stops, and on trains as LB buses. There's no law or litter enforcement on transit. With climate change, we need covering at bus stops. Nothing's been done. I have photos of it all. Well, John, I would say I agree. They all need covers. They need better maintenance and things like that. And sometimes the cities pick up that cost. Sometimes your business improvement districts pick up that cost. Sometimes it's the transit agencies that pick up that cost. And I think it just really comes down to getting people to the table and identifying where there's a problem and getting a plan to solve it. So depending on where your location is, I would encourage you to just reach out to my office in Long Beach, and we can help you address some of these issues. Just email my chief of staff, matthew.hamlet@longbeach.gov, and I'll ask Matt or Jonathan to drop his email in that chat. Okay, next one. Kirk Davis, on the eastbound SR 91 widening project from Atlantic to Cherry, North Long Beach, where do you stand on this project, and why is health equity not taking precedence in protecting the overall health of my family and neighbors? That's a loaded question. The only way I see is through the no build option. I posted other comments. Well, Kirk, we go back. I created the Coalition for a Healthy North Long Beach. You became the chair of that coalition. I know who you are. I know what you stand for, and we need to have advocates like you step up. I'm very familiar with the project. We did a number of outreach over the years around the green belt, and the issue is you got a 91 freeway bisecting a neighborhood. North of that freeway, there isn't an entire park in the whole city. The freeway isn't leaving, but it did divide the neighborhood. How can you reconnect the neighborhood? How can you use any opportunity to maintain or update the freeways to beautify the neighborhood? So that's been the ongoing discussion. City council, the community created the 91 Greenbelt program. The vision is great. And 91 has early action funding to improve sound walls and things like that. And so if there is an option, and if this project advances, then Caltrans has agreed to modernize it and include all of these improvements for the community and add a park and open space. Now, it's not up to me whether Caltrans goes with the build option or the no build option. I just know that the no build option doesn't improve the condition of the sound walls there. It doesn't do anything to improve the condition today, which is failed infrastructure that wasn't designed well generations ago. The build option, what does it do? I think it adds 10 feet of additional space, but doesn't encroach on any city property. They keep it within theirs. Builds a sound wall that's, I think, 6 feet higher, better sound, all of those things. And what it does is it may have some impacts that relieve some of the congestion on Artesia Boulevard, which is what the neighborhood has advocated for a long time. Put that traffic back on the freeway, get out of my neighborhood, de-intensify Artesia, make it more walkable. I think that can be achieved, but ultimately it's not up to me. I supported an additional community meeting. Caltrans reached out to me. I know that Kirk, you submitted the request for the meeting, and that's going to happen on the 18th. So look forward to what the community comes up with. Look forward to what Caltrans comes up with. But at the end of the day, we should be looking at infrastructure as an opportunity to drive more change and more equity and restore our community. So that's kind of where I stand on that project, Kirk. And then we're going to go, we're going to do a last question with Shanae, and then we'll get some final, no, it's Suzanne, it looks like. We're going to do a last question with Suzanne. Then we're going to get some final comments, final thoughts from our panel, and then we'll wrap this thing up. So it says, Mayor Richardson, I think you mean Vice Mayor Richardson, and Mr. Terry spoke to looking at policy and procurement changes for SBE, CB, WEB, DBs, so that requirements like insurance and bonding and length of time to get paid don't limit opportunities. How would you do this on a regional level? So I'm going to kick it to you, Mr. Terry. You started off. I can add to it. What do you think? How do we do this?
I don't know. I thought you were going to talk about that from a policy standpoint and try to help us out. But
I could do that.
From a regional level, I would say just holding not only the agencies, we have to do our part too as private side. Some of the larger firms, which we call primes, right? We have to hold them accountable, make them own up to their part of building these projects and including us, the small guys, into these projects.
Right.
Regional level, and Metro does a great job, I have to say. Mm-hmm. OCTA, Long Beach, Kim McDonald was over there. A great project. I have to say we've been lucky to be included in the last 14 consecutive design bills with Metro. And part of that reason is because of this program. Now, how do we increase that? How do we bring more awareness on the construction side? I think there's been studies done, and I think the last one that was done was in San Francisco. A lot of times the agencies think there's a risk involved with holding the bond and not there isn't a requirement for the small contractor to have a bonding or the insurance that they need to cover to perform on these projects.
Right.
The agencies would carry that bond, and you would enroll into their bonding program, and if anything happened, it would fall under the agency and not fall back on the general contractor. So I guess a lot of agencies they run away from this because there's a great risk factor here. But San Francisco did a great job and did a study, and it showed that they didn't have one incident, and so they kept that program in place. So I think it just depends on where you are, as you said, regional, that we look at the agencies holding these bondings and insurance so that more small companies can perform on these projects and grow and make a profit.
Fantastic. Well, thanks a lot, Demauris. Well, it's about time to wrap it up, and I know our senator needs to get back to Sacramento tonight. She's got a flight tonight, right? All right. Well, we're gonna go ahead and Senator, you want to give any final thoughts before you take off?
I just want to say thank you so much. This has been really great, Vice Mayor, having just being with these amazing colleagues on this panel, President Terry and Commissioner Martinez. I know we work together quite a bit as well, and I'm just excited at the leadership that's here because this is exactly what California looks like in terms of transportation, and we need to continue moving the needle forward. A few other issues that I just wanted to touch on as well as I think it was Suzanne's point that had talked about public transportation and making it easier. I mean, there needs to be also thought about mobility as a service, as many people are talking about, and ensuring that there's like multimodal trip planning ahead of time to make it easy on you, in addition to more resources for public transit. And so that's an area of focus as well. But when I talk about the heavy-duty vehicles, we need to think about who drives them, and it's our communities that drive them. It's the, short haul, long haul folks. My dad was a truck driver, so very much our communities that are impacted and that will need these resources to be able to go electric or hydrogen fuel cell, whatever that might look like. And so I just want to continue pushing that. And I want to thank you again, Vice Mayor Richardson, for having us today. This was a really great discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator. Michele?
Yes, thank you, Vice Mayor Richardson. Great to be on this panel and be part of this space. I just have some final comments, and it's this. I mentioned it earlier. Representation matters, but so does participation. And we need to make sure that the representation looks like us throughout California, and we're starting to see that, and that's good. But when we need to also rekindle democracy, and that's on a people-centered approach. People have to come first. And I feel like I keep on repeating this, but at the end of the day, it's not about just voting. It's about being at the table and providing your input. And so I'll ask all of us, who do we choose to be for this time, and realize that the work that's in front of us is the work that needs to be done. And that is centered on people. And so I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to put people in the limelight, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are going to solve our problems, not government.
All right. I certainly appreciate that, Michele. And I'm sure we're going to have you back to talk about some other topic, or maybe we'll do some Strong Towns edition. I would love to do that. Right. Hey, Morris, thanks for contributing today. What final thoughts do you want to leave us with?
I just want to say thank you, Vice Mayor, for having me, being a part of this conversation. I really appreciate this. And I learned new stuff today. I learned the P4. So, Michele, thank you. I greatly appreciate that. And I look forward to tuning in, seeing more. Fantastic.
Well, certainly thank you. And to everybody, thanks for participating. A few more questions came in. We didn't have time to get to them, but we got through as many as we could. For updates on CiviTalks LB, or to share this segment with your friends or your colleagues, go to my Facebook page. It's at Rex Richardson LB, and you can share this. And you can connect with me on social. On Twitter, I'm at Rex Richardson LB. On Facebook, it's at Rex Richardson LB. And on Instagram, it's at Rex Richardson. We'll get the LB at some point on there. And join us. We're every second and fourth Thursday from 5 to 6 or 6:30, depending on the conversation, on Blue Jeans and on our Facebook page. So thanks a lot to everyone who joined us. And we'll see you at the next. The next one we're going to have Congressman Alan Lowenthal, and we've been talking about federal relief, and we'll have some data and some facts, and hopefully a package that's been approved by Congress to talk through. So that should be a really good one. We look forward to having you back in 2 weeks with Congressman Lowenthal. Thanks a lot, everyone. Take care. Have a good night.
Thank you.